decisive action is needed now more than ever. Today, as we stand before the biggest threat our civilization has faced, climate change, we have the opportunity to rewrite history and forge a new way forward as we follow the path towards achieving the SDG goals. Our presence here declares our commitment, a collective pledge to chart a shared roadmap that turns aspirations into realities. The upcoming journey rests on the belief in our collective force. Aligned with the planet's pulse, we channel our passion into forging alliances with the potential to transform people's lives, embracing the certainty that impact unfurls when knowledge takes the form of action. We highly value the unique perspectives gained from the past Finance and Common Summits, which we now welcome in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have evolved into a formidable movement, boasting more than 520 public development banks and over 450 financial institutions. Together, we strengthen our shared vision to empower people with accessible and inclusive tools to be the driving forces of change. Welcome to the 4th Finance and Common Summit, where we stand united to breathe life into a global coalition with shared purposes, to mobilize private capital toward achieving sustainable development goals, to strive to mainstream social impact, to ensure that human rights and climate-positive actions are at the heart of our transformative strategies and programs, to keep paving the way for a future where transformation becomes our legacy.
Buenas tardes, les solicitamos respetuosamente mantener en modo silencio sus celulares para no interferir en el desarrollo del evento. En cumplimiento con lo dispuesto en el artículo 38 de la Ley 996 de 2005, Ley de Garantías, nos permitimos informar que el presente evento no tiene connotación electoral, razón por la cual solicitamos a todas las personas que aspiren a cargos de elección popular para las próximas elecciones abstenerse de participar en esta actividad, so pena de incurrir en las inhabilidades y penas contempladas en la ley. En este momento hace su ingreso el presidente de la República.
The President of the Republic of Colombia, Gustavo Petro Urrego, has just arrived. The World Summit of Public Banks of Development Fix 2023 has exceeded all expectations, contributing significantly to crucial topics such as financial inclusion and SMEs, climate change and biodiversity, sustainable infrastructure, and innovative solutions that promise a more equitable and sustainable future for all. We have witnessed the profound dialogues and innovative solutions that promise a more equitable and sustainable future for all. With over 1,300 participants on site and 1,663 that joined online the broadcast, we have built a deep message of transformation for a more sustainable future through the dialogues that took place during the summit. To start this session, I invite you to stand up to listen to the national anthem of Colombia. You may take your seats now. During this closing session, outstanding representatives of the Colombian government and public development banks will summarize and present strategies, ideas, and recommendations which have arisen as a result of the activities conducted during these 3 days. In this way, I would like to give the floor to Remy Rook, the General Director of the AFD Group and the Chair of FIX. Mr. President.
It's a great honor to conclude this 4th edition of the Finance in Commons FIX Summit and to report on the progress made here in Cartagena. Thank you so much, Presidente, for hosting us so warmly here in Cartagena de Indias, Colombia. It is only natural that FIX has taken place this year in Latin America and the Caribbean, the continent that invented SDGs and a dreamland for public development banks, with more than 100 public financial institutions working for a just transition in your region, 6 very active in Colombia. The turnout of our 3-day forum proves that our FIX movement is rapidly growing, widening and deepening. Cartagena attracted over 1,300 participants from 100 countries, over 200 speakers, nearly 200 public development banks, and several hundred colleagues from international organizations, civil society, philanthropists, private sector, central banks, mayors, as well as academics. I really want to thank you all for the friendship and the goodwill, and especially our co-host, Bancoldex, of course. Thank you, Javier, for your leadership has been stellar all year long in making this forum possible. The Inter-American Development Bank, dear Annabelle, the European Investment Bank, dear Ambroise, Alide, dear Luis Antonio, CAF, dear Sergio, and also IFAD, dear Alvaro, Casa Depositi and Prestiti, dear Paolo, the Caribbean Development Bank, of course, dear Jean, and a special thank, of course, to the Finance in Commons Secretariat team and our Secretary General, Adama Mariko. Let me summarize the substance of our discussion into 3 points from our final communiqué. First, Cartagena confirmed that FIX has become the global movement of all public development banks and their stakeholders. The FIX coalition manages $23 trillion in assets and about $2.5 trillion in annual investments, more than 10% of total investment flows. And we are playing a significant counter-cyclical role, plus 20% on average, to face the COVID-19. IDFC member loans reported a record high of $288 billion of green finance last year, a 30% increase from the year before. We are at scale, Presidente, and we want to do more. Because we all feel a sense of urgency and responsibility to protect the most vulnerable and to preserve global commons, our twin mandate. This is the message we are conveying now in each and every fora, notably recently the Summit for a New Global Financing Pact in Paris. You attended, President, where a special FIX event took place, the EU LAC Summit in Brussels, the Amazon Summit in Belém, the BRICS Summit in Johannesburg, and soon the G20 Leaders Summit in Delhi, the UN SDG Summit in New York, the IMF World Bank meeting in Marrakesh, COP28 in Dubai, where we will showcase PDB's contribution and solutions to make finance more inclusive and sustainable. We stand at your disposal and we want to be a source of hope. Second message, this edition, FIX 23, was a working summit, and we agreed to our Cartagena work program, on which a progress report will be presented by the 2024 FIX summit, most certainly in Asia. The first pillar of this action plan is about aligning finance with the SDGs, Paris Agreement, and Global Biodiversity Framework. FIX decided here to set a working group to further define and mainstream sustainable development investment principles, to avoid the risk of fragmentation attached to the multiplication of specific frameworks and taxonomies. More specifically, the Green Coalition of Development Banks of the countries sharing the Amazon region presented its roadmap. A new coalition of banks willing to work together on oceans and blue finance was born here to contribute to the UN Ocean Conference 2025 in Nice. And a number of innovative solutions based on nature were discussed to be scaled up, including the Global Green Bond Initiative, the IDB Green Bond Transparency Platform, and the work on debt for nature swaps led by Colombia, Kenya, and France. We also welcomed the Caribbean Development Bank bid to host the Secretariat of the Santiago Network for loss and damage. On sustainable infrastructure, the urgent need to originate more quality projects was affirmed, stressing the key role of national and sub-national development banks, both on the origination and the financing and risk side. Participants shared their experiences on direct financing of municipalities and on the mobilization of private finance via blending and de-risking activities. SDG alignment means also way more attention to SMEs, job creation, and gender equality, the social dimension of our work. The Montreal Group held its annual meeting alongside FIX. The second pillar of our Cartagena action plan is to further increase cooperation between all public development banks. FIX members agreed to set a financial innovation lab to strengthen cooperation between all of us. This lab will in priority incubate two issues: the generalization of contingent debt clauses linked to disasters and the management of foreign exchange risk. IDB, IDFC, and the philanthropists expressed an interest to accompany this innovation lab, thanks to them. Participants also concurred that substantial capacity need to be built in the PDB system. We will work on a dedicated program providing customized technical assistance responding to the effective needs of public development banks, especially in Africa. PDBs also expressed their will to harness the power of sports and cultural industries for sustainable development goals. Our Coalition for Sustainable Development Through Sport, which I invite you all to join, launched a roadmap in the perspective of the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games, where a major leaders' summit on sport for sustainable development will happen, convened by President Macron. Third and last pillar of our action plan, we want to join forces and mobilize all other willing stakeholders. The FIX research program is at the heart of FIX from day one, with its unique database of all the banks and now 140 academic papers produced about public development banks only over the last 4 years, more than what had ever been done in the past 50 years. We will pursue private finance representatives, notably the Bern Union and GFANZ were also present in Cartagena. They acknowledged the importance of converging towards common methodologies and taxonomies, working together with rating agencies and standard setters. Public development banks and philanthropies also explored here their synergies, building on their comparative advantages and on a first published white paper. Last but not least, dear Alice, the declaration from civil society organizations emanating from CSOs, indigenous communities and human rights defenders was particularly well received and helpful. By our next Finance in Common Summit next year, the coordination mechanism we have between FIX and CSOs organization should provide a joint working plan. Last, beyond our movement, we want to support our governments and leaders and contribute to the ongoing reform of the international financial architecture. Our plea, Presidente, here is the following. We ask for stronger mandates to systematically align our operations and that of our clients and partners with the SDGs. We encourage our shareholders to approve common methodologies for all of us. We stand ready to extend the recommendation from the G20 Capital Adequacy Framework report to all public development banks to better leverage the capital base existing of all of us. Last, we hope then to merit your trust and manage more capital and concessional resources for good. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. It is time to give the floor to Álvaro Lario, Chair of the International Agricultural Fund, FIDA. President Petro, honorable ministers, colleagues, friends, I will start in Spanish, a few words for the president. In the first place, to congratulate President Petro and his government for holding this important event in Latin America. It is a symbol of the commitment and leadership for an international financial system that is more inclusive, like the one we are all looking for in this room. I also want to highlight, President, that many of the values and principles behind your rural development program and the Lama Colombian World Power of Life is a fundamental part of investments and how we think of programs at FIDA to listen to indigenous and peasant communities, decision-making that prioritize people, fair distribution of benefits in the agricultural chains, and to preserve and work with nature. These are values that can guide us.
For everybody in the room. As we bring this summit to a close, taking stock of the progress made and agreeing on the next steps, let us remember why we are here and for whom we have built this important collaboration and partnership. Finance in Common was launched while the world was being battered by the pandemic. Since then, the war in Ukraine has further exacerbated food crises and made the SDGs even more difficult to achieve by 2030. In addition, the geopolitical tensions have deepened, forced migration and conflicts are on the rise, and the increasing extreme weather events are having devastating effects on the most vulnerable communities. This is why Finance in Common is a very important space to connect, to come together, to explore joint solutions beyond the current divisions, that is, to break the silos between development and finance, public and private, global north and global south. Sorry on that. Domestic and multilateral. That was not done on purpose, for sure, to create some attention, but certainly brought the attention. So to break the silos between development and finance, between the public and the private, between the global north and the global south, between domestic and multilateral, between humanitarian and development, and between development or climate, where we should never have to choose. At IFAD, we highly value FIX as a platform to foster collaboration and partnerships to scale up investments to combat hunger, poverty, inequality, and the impact of climate change. The role that public development banks can play in transforming food systems to become more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable for all is immense. As Remy has mentioned, and thank you for your leadership on bringing us together, public development banks invest 2 to 3 trillion per year, and they provide 2/3 of food systems financing, which goes beyond agriculture. It relates to investing in energy, agriculture, water, environment, local development, but also rural women, youth, and indigenous peoples. Public development banks, and especially those dedicated to agriculture and serving the rural areas, have played also an essential role in financing many sectors across value chains. And yet, these investments remain underrepresented in their portfolios when you compare them to the contribution of agribusiness and small-scale farmers to GDP and to employment in many of the low and middle-income economies. At this moment of uncertainty and food crisis, where food security has become in many countries a matter of national security, the platform of public agricultural development banks led by IFAD in collaboration with Agence Française represents a big opportunity towards scaling up action for those most in need. Over these last years, it has almost doubled its membership and has now 130 members across 98 nations. As we reflect on the discussions of the past few days and the summary provided by Remy, I would like to share very briefly with you these 3 recommendations on the way forward related to food systems and agriculture. First, food systems transformation and all the sectors can transform the lives of rural communities and men where 70% of the global poverty is located. Public development banks should be given a stronger mandate as implementation agents for national agriculture and food systems pathways and national determined contributions. Second, even if we structure global solutions, public development banks are key to ensure that these are implemented also locally. We have to invest in local production and value chains, use diversified and ancient nutrition crops, and local indigenous people have to become key actors in this transformation. And third and finally, climate adaptation has to be integrated at the core of our investments to ensure that food systems and agricultural practices are resilient to the current and future extreme weather events. Without a real integration of climate in agriculture and in many other sectors, business as usual will lead to more and more vulnerable people falling into poverty and hunger, creating a further vicious cycle of forced migration and conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, the current context calls for a greater role for public development bank investing in promoting inclusive and resilient global food systems that can withstand current and future economic and climate-related shocks. We have a challenging path ahead, but it is a challenge that we have no choice but to overcome if we really want to leave no one behind. Thank you very much.
Le damos las gracias al señor Álvaro Lario.
We thank Mr. Álvaro Lario. And now I will give the floor to Alice Mogui, President of the International Federation of Human Rights.
Your Excellency, President Pedro, honorable ministers, friends. In the words of T.S. Eliot, time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. This has been the stuff of our reflections and conversations over these past 3 days. In terms of our achievements, a key achievement has been the building on the past declarations and commitments from the summits of 2020, 2021, and 2022. The 2020 declaration focused on a just, inclusive, and rights-based transition, recognizing that this is imperative. Earlier today, we had a session focused on building bridges, public development banks as catalysts for human rights, to reflect on why human rights are relevant for PDBs, how to ensure effective stakeholder and rights holder engagement, and how to apply human rights to energy transition. In 2021, the declaration focused on civil society, recognizing that it has a role to play and a commitment to structured dialogue with civil society. Civil society is now a member of the multi-stakeholder working group which was established after FIX 2022. It comprises a FIX Secretariat, PDBs, international organizations, as well as civil society organizations. And it aims to support PDBs' engagement with stakeholders on the ground, encourage PDBs to put in place strong human rights due diligence and monitoring procedures, as well as robust remedy and accountability mechanisms. We have also heard about the Civil Society Declaration, to which Remy referred, of FIX 2023, and it addresses 4 themes: human rights, civil society, PDB relations strengthening, development finance, and climate change, sustainability, and biodiversity. We also know that in 2022, PDB statement, which was produced on human rights and human rights-based approaches, was, however, only endorsed by 5 institutions. A strong message which has been conveyed during civil society discussions here has been the need for commitments to be transformed into action, the need for PDBs and FIC to walk the talk. However, it must be remembered that as we journey together, there will be similarities and differences of thought, moments of intense frustration, and moments of elation. At the core of our work together has to be the mutual recognition that we are bound by our common humanity and dignity. There is still much for us to learn about one another, that we have a responsibility towards one another and a responsibility as stewards of the environment. The Finance Common Working Group on Human Rights has a questionnaire at the FIC Secretariat to gather information which will contribute to the necessary continuation of this bridge building. We have identified 5 essential messages and recommendations. The first, human rights are the business of PDBs and not only the state. For development financing to have sustainable development results, people must be at the center as partners in development, in both policies and operations. As human rights are relevant for PDBs, while the state has a duty to protect human rights, the PDBs have a responsibility to respect human rights, and through due diligence processes plan for credible mitigation measures in the event of violations of human rights. And this responsibility applies to both the PDB and the client. Secondly, the climate crisis has been many years in the making, largely as a consequence of unsustainable development practices. Communities, civil society formations, including social movements, have been raising the alarm about environmental degradation. Nature, too, has spoken and continues to speak increasingly loudly through devastating fires, floods, and droughts. Mitigation and adaptation are now part of our vocabulary, but will they be part of our collective, sustainable, timely action? Thirdly, communities in whose name development financing is sought need to be recognized as having agency to determine their future. This means that stakeholder engagement should not be reduced to box-ticking exercises aimed at convincing communities to be passive project beneficiaries. It should be an active listening and learning engagement. Thank you. This means that stakeholder engagement should not be reduced to a box-ticking exercise aimed at convincing communities to be passive project beneficiaries. Instead, it should be an active listening and learning engagement based on the recognition of the value of indigenous knowledge, which has for centuries sustained our environment. We have today listened to the experiences of those who protect the environment for us all, even at the risk of reprisals, including losing their lives. The recommendation is that PDBs be encouraged to develop human rights and environmental due diligence policies which comply with UN guiding principles. For an effective conceptual shift from a profit and economic-centered development model to a community-centered development model, communities need to be recognized as actors with local knowledge and capacity, and not as passive beneficiaries of imposed development projects. Fourthly, there needs to be a shift in thinking, planning, and operations from a development model which favors profit over people to one which is rights, obligations, and dignity-based. maintains transparent, effective, and time-sensitive social and environmental standards, including human rights, and fosters sustainable economic, social, and environmental development. This may at times mean that PDBs have to step up and stop financing projects which violate human rights, which violate the free, prior, and informed consent principle for all community projects, or contribute to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And lastly, fifthly, we believe that human rights is the business of PDBs, and they are significant catalysts for change. We strongly encourage PDBs to promote sustainable finance aimed at environmentally and socially sustainable and equitable societies. This will be possible if human rights, guided by the UN guiding principles as a minimum, are internalized in both internal and external policies and practice. There is need for transparency and non-arbitrariness in the determination of the severity of human rights risk, and a review of the predetermined risk categories which primarily address environmental risk to the effective exclusion of the impact on people. In conclusion, these commitments must be translated into action. By doing this, we shall move one step closer to that people-centered, community-centered, sustainable development paradigm, which will enable our common humanity to thrive with equitable access to resources, with the protection of human rights, civil, political, social, economic, and cultural. PDBs and multilateral financial institutions have a role to play as catalysts. This will lead us to a place where we can ensure a transition to just financial systems for the well-being of people, for the planet, and for ethical profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We give the floor now to Anabel Gonzalez, Vice President of the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB. President Petro, excellent ministers, colleagues, good afternoon to all.
I want to thank His Excellency President Petro for the leadership Bancoldex in hosting this historic event in Cartagena de Indias. I wish to also acknowledge Minister Bonilla, FIX Chairman and AFD CEO Ryu, IFAD President Lario, FIDH President Mogwe, CAF Executive President Diaz-Granados, and all our other co-hosts and partners for gathering us here in this beautiful place. For me and my colleagues at the IDB, it has been thrilling to see FIX take place in our home region, where we have worked for more than 6 decades. It is now clear to all in the world that Latin America and Caribbean countries have a great deal to offer when it comes to tackling the great development challenges of our times. This summit marks an important milestone in forging the next generation of alliances for development financing. This FIX community accounts for 10% of global development financing, and it has the potential to mobilize hundreds of billions in additional private capital to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. FIX in Cartagena has shown great progress towards better collaboration in important work streams. For example, as part of the FIX Agricultural Coalition, IFAD and the IDB presented a new study on ways to strengthen collaboration in food system financing and food security. And through the FIX Gender Coalition, IDB and UN Women will coordinate a study with more than 50 PDBs worldwide to review best practices on gender financing to promote women entrepreneurship. As I think back over the discussions of these past 3 days, I see 3 areas where we can take immediate steps to advance our shared goals. First, all of us in the FIX community need to work more proactively with its stakeholders to measure the impact of our projects and create a positive feedback loop to be more effective in our future efforts. By strengthening monitoring and evaluation, we can ensure that our scarce resources are deployed effectively to solve our most pressing challenges. The Fixed Knowledge Advisory Group can accelerate these efforts by identifying the best evaluated, highest impact interventions among our organizations. We need to strengthen our partnership with academia and think tanks to achieve this goal. I want to highlight that the IDB is working with ALIDE to launch a new working group on monitoring and evaluation to enhance the institutional capacity of PDBs in our region to measure the contribution towards achieving the SDGs. A second takeaway is that we need to keep rethinking how we deploy our financial instruments to mobilize additional capital. Through innovation in the deployment of financial instruments, public development banks can attract much more private capital to contribute to a greener, more resilient, and socially inclusive future. Our region offers multiple examples of creativity on this front. Earlier this year, the IDB, in collaboration with the Chilean Development Agency, Corfo, approved a loan to capitalize a risk adjustment fund alongside the World Bank and other donors, such as the Climate Investment Fund. This fund is expected to mobilize $7 billion for green hydrogen projects within a few years, and it is a clear example on how to scale up private financing for projects alongside with public funding. Now, the challenge is to replicate and scale these types of instruments in many more countries. A third and final takeaway is that we need to keep improving how we collaborate. Two examples of smart collaboration stand out from the last few days. We were delighted by the endorsement we received in a new joint declaration to promote the adoption of green bond transparency platform by countries outside the Latin America and Caribbean region. This platform is helping to reassure investors who are eager to expand their green bond portfolios, and we are certain that it will help in other parts of the world. And of course, we can all take pride in the progress of the Green Coalition of Development Banks of the countries sharing the Amazon region. The coalition presented a roadmap for action on regional integration and collaboration, common frameworks for sustainable investments, financial solutions, and technical support. I'm more confident than ever that we can have a dramatic impact in these and many other areas, so long as we work together. Let me conclude by underscoring that collaboration requires coordination, and coordination requires principles and standards. Increasing harmonization of standards and adoption of best global practices among PDBs and stakeholders is essential to increase efficiency and scale, so we're very glad to see that this will be one of the key topics in the 2024 summit. We at the IDB are fully committed to deepening this collaboration with all of you, and we look forward to working with each and every one of you. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Ahora escucharemos.
And now we will hear from Sergio Díaz-Granados, President of the Latin American and Caribbean Development Bank, CAF. His Excellency, President of the Republic of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, special greetings to the members attending this closing session. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to the teams organizing this fourth Summit of Finance in Common, our co-hosts, Bancoldex, ALIDE, IDB, the European Investment Bank, of course, FD, ICIC, the Caribbean Development Bank, the Club of Banks, FIDA, the World Federation of Development Financial Institutions. I want to stress the leadership of Colombia in the organization of the FIC Summit. This reflects their power to summon representatives from all continents that understood this call on a critical moment through which the world financial system is going through, and particularly the challenge of the impacts of climate change. As it has been said, said, we have had 3 days of very productive meetings around how can public development banks respond to the emergent invitation of our member states and the society, of which you, President Petro, were an active spokesperson in the recent summit held in Paris. Public development banks began to have a stronger presence about 50 years ago. And as we have heard before by previous speakers, they represent about 12% of global financing. During the last decade, we have seen an acceleration of banks oriented by lenders as a response to the need to deepen the type and the time of the solutions offered. We are then a system for financing development, and we have the responsibility to innovate our instruments. And it is obvious that the work we have completed is not enough. Despite everything we have done, we have to close additional gaps in order to be able to face the current emergencies. They are all associated to human rights, poverty, inequality, climate change, migration, and large debt after the pandemic. This fixed summit allows us to give one additional step to accomplish a systemic change and evolution of the world financial culture. And the process already started at the recent forum at the Business Forum of CELAC or ECLAC and the European Union recently held in Brussels. These public development banks belong to the people, and for that reason, CAF promotes for the first time a meeting of all the ministers of Latin America and the Caribbean at panel discussions of economics and finances with ministers of the European Union for the first time in history in order to be able to discuss in practice the new design of the global financial system, which protects life, as you recently said, President Petro, at the Paris summit. Next week, we will have a meeting of CAF in Santiago de Compostela with proposals in the area of human resources, digital transformation, green transition, with a vision that places Latin America as the best solution and a region of peace. The development banks cooperating in this region must continue to work in order to give answers at the necessary scale according to the realities and peculiarities of Latin America and the Caribbean. Allow me just to present some ideas. Before this summit between CELAC and the European Union in the 2025 in Colombia, we have to strengthen the operating capability of development banks there, work with local governments, with the private sector, and with civil society. And this can be done either through capitalization of banks, something that we already did in CAF with our partners a year and a half ago. Each dollar placed in these banks mobilizes 7 to 10 times what was contributed in capital for solutions for the countries of the region. We must also promote the connectivity of these banks of the region with other areas around the world to empower our responsibilities. And we have to take advantage of the opportunity of having Brazil as the chair of G20 to speak again about risk rating agencies, because much of that capital should now be at the service of our people. And we have to promote also swaps, debt swaps, the natural assets of Latin America as a sponge, or to promote new financial instruments such as the Blue-Green Bank in Barbados, of which CAF will be a member, a contributor, member, and financer. And number 3, this is a message, Mr. President, that you have been repeatedly emphasizing, and we are also promoting this from the bank. This is a world asset that we have to place at the service of new users through innovation and political responsibility. The last emission of special drawing rights was as a result of COVID to respond to the huge debt of the region. And I want to use special drawing rights as a solution to finance and to face climate change. There is a huge potential to use these special drawing rights, moving them through from the south to the north. We have to change the direction of the equation and allow for the protection of our environmental assets, accelerating our decarbonization process. There are 3 banks in the region that are authorized by the IMF to use special drawing rights. And thanks to these, I want to inform you, Mr. President, that we have created a special unit just for the use of special drawing rights. This was done 6 months ago under the authorization of the IMF. So in less than 36 hours, the board of CAF, and I want to express my gratitude to Minister Umaña and Bonilla, we gave a support to Argentina to solve a specific problem of Argentina. And with these, we showed that it is possible to use a special drawing rights for emergency situations in the countries of the region. Based on these, we would like, Mr. President, to commit ourselves to promote your proposal of using special drawing rights as an asset for the solution of the problems of climate crisis. With determination, openness, flexibility, we can use these assets which are represented in special drawing rights. I want to conclude by thanking Minister Bolivia and Minister Umaña, Director Gonzalez from the Planning Department for the commitment we recently signed in Colombia, the alignment of the whole bank strategy with the National Development Plan of Colombia, the power of life, to emphasize the government priorities. And we placed at the disposal of the planning team $7 billion for financing up to 2026 in order to complete all the expectations of the government of Colombia. Thank you very much to all the participants for attending FIX.
We thank our panelists for their valuable contributions and reflections during this closing plenary. Ladies and gentlemen, for the organizers of this 4th version of the World Summit of Development Banks, Finances in Common FIX 2023, it is an honor to count on the participation of illustrious people that contribute precisely to this effort to strengthen finances for sustainable development. The President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro Urrego, will now address you. Dear chairs, directors, and representatives of financial organizations that have participated in this 4th version of the World Summit of Banks, Executive President of CAF, Sergio Díaz-Granados, Chair of the International Fund of Agricultural Development, FIDA, Álvaro Lario, CEO of the French Development Agency, Rémi Rieu, Vice President of Countries of the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, Anabel González, Chair of the International Federation for Human Rights, Alice Mowe, ministers and officers of this government, Mayor William Jorge from Cartagena, India, representatives of indigenous communities, both national and international, associations and entrepreneurs participating from this summit, media, both international and national, and in general, to all those that are here with us today. Well, without a doubt, during this year of work, we have wanted Colombia to be at the vanguard of a world discussion, a discussion that has steps ahead. It is complex, difficult, and it has to face perhaps the main problem of humankind today, which is the possibility of its own extinction. And for that reason, our Vice President is today with the Minister of Environment in Africa, in Kenya, with the Paris summit, there was a meeting of 3 geographic areas in America, Europe, and Africa, discussing about the possibility of a new architecture of the world financial system, trying to face the crises of mankind today. In Kenya, we have the African chiefs of states. The president of Kenya defends this thesis. And now it is my turn to host and help in that same effort, how to transform world financing to solve the contemporary problems humankind is facing, that can be summarized in the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, but that in the end would not have a solution if we do not face the problem of climate change successfully. The hosts of public banking, public development banking, Bancoldex in the first place, and Ban Agrario that I see here, the agricultural bank. The agricultural bank is a first floor bank, a public bank. They have a mission. I am bolder than the rest of my cabinet, so I would like to step ahead, which is to fund the popular economy. The popular economy is understood as that half of the national economy that guarantees 80% of jobs, but that is not going under salary or wage relationships, and that, as in the majority of countries in Latin America, is more related with the individual and lonely initiatives, a very female-oriented initiative with possibilities of associations with micro companies, very, very small corporations, and somewhat of the SMEs in Colombia. That very noisy, intensive world that moves down the streets and the corners of the cities every day. It is just to walk 2 blocks away and see it here. Around the rural world, producing by far almost all of the food for the Colombian people. That comes from land possessions of about 1 or 2 hectares. Of that work of peasant families there in very small portions of land, that is where the food of almost all of Colombians comes from. This is what we call pure and simple popular economy. We have the thesis that if we finance it, not marginally, but in larger scales, not just to show it, but to assign the resources that we have in our country in an important manner towards that popular economy and to empower it, we could have one of the most important instruments fighting against poverty. And here we change a paradigm, because traditionally it has been understood dividing the economy between the formal and the informal one. And an economist would not do that. It is more a division with regards to the laws and the regulations than towards economic processes. And what we had looked for is how to deflate informal economy to inflate formal economy, the economy of the wages economy or salary economy. And we have failed in that attempt until now. Colombian capitalism is not able to absorb what we have called the informal economy. So it has transformed into a war against that economy. Persecutions down the streets, tensions. We changed that idea by the opposite thing, by strengthening it, empowering it, thinking that when the economic resources flow, knowledge resources as well, the support from the government, that so-called informal economy that we call the popular economy could even be the big dynamizer of the Colombian economy and the fundamental instrument to overcome poverty. Here at the heart of this, we have, without a doubt, the public development banks in Colombia. In Colombia, it has weakened. Today, we try to make it reappear, and that implies technological processes that it will have to implement to jump in this race where it was forgotten and to stand at the front of this public policy. The agricultural bank, Bancoldes, etc., what we call the bicentennial group, remembering the 200 years of our republic, it would have a very important role today in the definition of a counter-cyclical activity because the economy is staggering. And this is the local aspect, but evidently that local picture cannot be analyzed clearly. We cannot act clearly in the local area if we don't see what world context we are involved in and we don't raise our eyes and look at the horizon. If we do not understand where the world is going and what is happening in today's world, a country that looks at itself, we popularly say to look at our navel between mountains, between mountain ranges, and to see what is beyond the oceans. We could perfectly well clash if we don't know what happens in the planet and in humanity. But what is true is that we are experiencing a comprehensive crisis, they said in Davos when I was invited. I had never been there. Very cold, not like Cartagena, but not at all. And they said there, the people that lead those clubs, the rich, wealthy people on the earth, we are facing a poly-crisis, a vision that from that perspective should attract our attention. They were not only looking where to take a cruise on the next vacations, but they were looking at what for them, without a doubt, is a civilization, deep civilization crisis, not just any crisis. And that is centered in 5 aspects, more or less. The growth of poverty around the world, which is also the growth of hunger. The growth of social inequality that has reached levels never seen after the Belle Epoque, 1913. This economic stagnation, I think Germany was declared in recession or is about to, and economies are staggering around the world. The war in European territories, reminding us of our Second World War, and disease, illness. Almost all of us had something to do with this. Those 5 elements, all at a global scale, all at a world scale, mark not isolated facts, but all linked in what Pope Francis calls the crisis of humanity, a civilization crisis. And that is the context of the world. There, in that crisis, there is one concept that crosses them all: climate crisis. That is why Pope Francis has also called this the main problem of humanity. Today, climate crisis makes hunger grow, makes poverty grow, creates these wars, produces the economic stagnation, and it is highly probable that it is the great generator of disease that extends even more intensely, and it is more deadly amongst the human species. Therefore, the question is, how do we face this crisis? We cannot only do it from the local side, but it is necessary to act at a local level. The principles to solve it are global, but it affects any corner of the world. We cannot see it with the same ordinary instruments as if nothing were happening. And there is an extraordinary crisis. Instruments have to be extraordinary if the crisis is extraordinary. If we believe that with the normal instruments we are going to overcome this very extraordinary crisis, we are going to fail. And the problem of failure here is measured practically in the dissolution of life on this planet. We cannot fail here. It is not allowed. We are not allowed to fail. And that is not for next year. This is not for within 30 years. It is right now. It is our turn as a generation. And those have your popular vote as countries. We have that as leaders. Practically everywhere, that is the temporary horizon of action. Actions after that can be too late because the world would go into an irreversible stage. And from then on, the responsibility with which we have to examine these affairs and the speed at which we have to act. We are facing this circumstance specifically regarding finances and the financial system. The debt of countries, and I would say also of the people, grows faster than production. And that means that the future production is more in debt to be able to pay.
But not only debt is growing faster than production, but in developing countries, debt grows faster than in developed countries. And here in Colombia, we are experiencing that, and we will live that next year very intensely. Paying debt interest becomes not just the largest item of the national budget, but it grows faster than any other item. So if there is no change, over time, increasingly the work of Colombians paid through taxes to the state will be used to pay interest, just as somebody who uses a credit card but doesn't have any money to go shopping for groceries. So this world scenario is really worldwide, but particularly in South America. And in such a world, we have weak states. Our states are unable to respond with very little capacity to deal with the challenges of the crisis. There is a weakening of the public power in the world at a global scale. Indebtedness detracts from the financial capability, and if that is the case, all of its abilities are limited. And at these summit events, the Summit of Paris, COP, whatever, it seems to me that it's an illusion that they try to transfer the responsibility to what is called the private sector. More theoretically, to transfer the responsibility to the market. Can the market solve the climate crisis? That's the big question. And my answer, as far as I understand after attending all of these summits, is that who produced the climate crisis is the market. The market is the culprit. The accumulated growth of capital taking up more and more energy from coal and oil transferred into the atmosphere, the economic accumulation in a chemical way, and that's what is happening. And if we don't stop it, we are going to die from that problem as a species. So how can the market alone solve the main problem of humanity? I think that the market cannot do it on its own. I am not saying that the market cannot help. But it's like if we had a ball of this size or a smaller circle inside the large circle, And the small circle moves on the basis of profitable projects. How can we finance? We can only finance profitable projects. Private capital will only be available for profitable capitals. If we open up Guajira, clean energy production, the sun intensity or the force of the winds make a clean energy project profitable. But is that enough? And I see it at the Colombian scale. And maybe what we can contribute to solve the climate crisis in the world, our contribution will be to recover the million of hectares we lost in the Amazon region for different reasons. The main reason being extensive cattle growing facilities in the forest. Can somebody lend me money to recover that forest in the Amazon region? No, there is no profitability. You have to take the land, put an end to some economic activities or replace some economic activities, but in general, you have to let the forest grow and leave it alone. What profitability can we achieve from that? Well, maybe social responsibility, vital responsibility. That's the lung of mankind. And we are next to Brazil. But economically profitable? I don't think so. The way we have to measure that should be different. We are in different coordinates. It's a different mental world that can lead us to prioritize in South America the Amazon forest to recover its natural borders. But it cannot be measured in the small circumference of profits. And our colleague from Human Rights was very right in what she said. Profits cannot solve the problem of climate crisis. There is a limit, and that limit is very small. And hence, to be able to accomplish our objectives, what can we do? There is then a bigger circumference, the public arena, which has two forms: the state, which is so neglected and devaluated, and the civil society, the communities. And that has a larger circumference yet, because we know the state, we know a little bit about the public arena, but there is a larger circumference, which is the cooperation of the public at the global scale and planning at a global scale, which is unknown to humanity, but we have to build it. So it's not a struggle between the market and the climate, which was the big debate when I was a student. It's not the struggle between the market and the state or the private and the public. These are larger circumferences which are all necessary. They have to act simultaneously if we want to solve the main problem of mankind, which is its existence, its vital existence. If we start working along those lines, certainly the Public Development Bank will play a role. It will have to be stronger. The states will have to empower public banks. It would have to be a first-tier bank. The role will have to go from the institutional point of view in two ways: leading the private financial system, which is very powerful around the world, but it's the only that centralizes capitalism in the market in order to accomplish decarbonization objectives, and to take the central banks of the states, in Colombia, the Bank of the Republic. I don't know whether we have a representative from the Central Bank of Colombia here, but in the United States is the Federal Reserve. In each country, there is a central bank with power, but which actually is disconnected from the actual needs of mankind. to use funding for adaptation process to overcome the climate crisis, like a Marshall Plan. So I finish with the proposal submitted by Colombia in different international scenarios, which is being debated in South America. We achieved a consensus of all the countries in the recent summit held in Belém, in Brazil, the Amazon countries. It is being discussed by the African countries as well. We talked to President Biden, and it was discussed at the ECLAC summit in Brussels in Europe. So, looking at the experience of the International Monetary Fund during COVID, which managed a special drawing rights issuance, which is the currency of the IMF, we think we can have a larger issuance of these bonds. We can give a rebirth to Keynes today in the world, and to have a world issue that will allow, by paying creditors of debt with special drawing rights, the reduction of the debt service of all the countries of the world, with an objective, and that's to relieve the budgetary financial space of public power, so that we are able to develop a Marshall Plan against the climate crisis worldwide, to replicate COVID efforts at a larger scale with different criteria in terms of proportions among countries, etc., and with a relaunch of the world economy. That's Keynes. That issue will represent growth of the world economics, focused on an investment objective, which are investments that allow for a reduction. And that would be the only and powerful indicator to reduce green gas emissions around the world. The indicator has not declined. We are not solving the problem, and time is ticking towards the end. And the end will be in 10 or 15 years' time. Not because it will be the end of the world will go on. It's not because life on the planet will be extinguished, but because time will be up to sustain life in the planet, including the human species. That proposal of changing debt for climate action is a proposal we submit to you, so that you, as public development banks in your summits, and a team of experts was already set up between France, Kenya, Ghana, and Colombia, to submit it as a comprehensive proposal at the next COP and the United Nations meeting in New York. These are the coming events, which I hope will no longer be rhetoric, but will allow for building the necessary instruments to empower life in the planet. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for your words, President Petro, and for speaking to our attendees. Now, I ask you please to come up to the stage for the official picture. To all the distinguished Adama Marico, Javier Diaz Fajardo, Chair of Bancoldex, Jeannie Leon, Executive Director, Caribbean Development Bank, Paulo Lombardo, Director of Casa Depositi e Prestiti, and Ambroise Fayol, Vice President of the European Investment Bank, so that we can close this day.
A lo largo de
So throughout this Fix 2023 version, we have shared valuable lessons and we have generated solid commitments between all of the actors. This plenary marks and closes a cycle, but also the beginning of new initiatives and actions that detach from the cooperation that has occurred here. We say thank you. Thank you to all of you for your contributions.